let's start that again. I'm Dorothy Jones-Davis from Nation of Makers. I'm not usually the person that's leading this, but Dale is having some technical issues today, so I will be leading tonight's Plan C Live. And tonight's Plan C Live we're really excited about because we'll be speaking to individuals from the Shreveport, Louisiana area. As you know, like many areas of the country, Shreveport has been hit pretty hard with COVID, and the response has been pretty tremendous. And you guys might remember that a few years ago, or not a few years ago, excuse me, a few weeks ago, we talked to Demetrius Norman from Shreveport, and he was telling us a bit about the work that he's been doing. And so we invited Demetrius to join us tonight to tell us a bit more about what the work that's going on in Shreveport is, to introduce us to his colleagues that are makers in their own right in different areas of the city, helping to make an impact in that area in the response to COVID and in issues like STEM connectivity and computer access. So I will not be talking for too much because I want to hear from our esteemed panelists. Thank you all for being here today. We have Demetrius Norman, as I said before. We have Bianca Frazier, sorry, Candace Batista, and Keith Hansen joining us today. And so I'm going to actually turn it over to Demetrius to lead us in a conversation. Demetrius is going to give us a little bit more background about where we're at in Shreveport and what some of the connections are that brought this group of people together. So take it over, Demetrius.
All right, thank you very much, and very honored to be here, and definitely want to thank everybody for their time and joining us today, and you and Dale and Ms. Jennifer putting this this amazing event together. It's actually been a little bit of a challenge, obviously, like everywhere. We're in the state of Louisiana where, unfortunately, we have some of the highest numbers now. As a surprise to us, with us having more of a rural community and being more spread out, we were definitely expecting to at least, be able to mitigate this thing a lot better. And a lot of those numbers are kind of a mixture because we have some more largely populated areas, obviously like New Orleans and Baton Rouge in the South that account for a large portion of those numbers because it's more densely populated. But even up here up north, we're starting to see numbers creep up. Some of it is because of having to fuss with our neighbors and friends about social distancing and wearing masks. For those that keep up, we've had quite an ordeal, make the news with, I think one of our local leaders was saying that they want to lead a lawsuit against our mayor who had made the mask law because we're trying to respond to the numbers creeping up. And, the response from our governor was, well, we're going to make it state law and argue with that. And so now it's state law that people wear the mask and the PPE, which, as you know, when we started out with Get Us PPE, open source medical supplies months ago, there was a lot of debate and back and forth about, should people even have to wear masks? Are the masks effective? And, that conversation's kind of morphed over the months to now it's actually law and requirement. Every single establishment you go into, you're required to have those masks. So, we're thankful for the open source effort that you guys pioneered and put together because, low income people wouldn't have access to the mask if we couldn't get together with makers and people across the community and make those free or at least low cost to the point where we can give them away free. So that's definitely helped us out in, the support you guys have given us so far in being able to turn up our PPE making efforts here. We got some other needs, obviously, that we talked about with jobs, with people having to work remotely for the first time. We're obviously probably would be in person, but we're having to do a lot more of this meeting in seminars and conferences virtually for the first time. But it's really a challenge. We have a lot of our neighbors and friends in the digital gap before COVID-19. And during COVID-19, what we saw is a lot of pre-existing issues being exposed at a greater level. So we already had issues with trying to get people employed. We already had economic gaps, right, that Ms. Bianca Frazier deals with on a daily, right? And we already had social justice issues that, because a lot of people have more time and are home now, a lot of people are realizing how much racial injustice and social injustice we have. And you've seen people take to the streets in numbers, I think on a record level also this year, was a good record with a record number of civil rights and social justice protests this year. So there's definitely a correlation between all these systemic issues coming out during COVID, right? And people just saying enough. We're not going to take it. We're going to protect our neighbors and friends. And so it's funny because makerspaces, you know, we're all about a mixture of people from different backgrounds, a mixture of disciplines. It's like we're naturally like this little mixture of things in the community, like a cultural mashup. And so, you know, the good side of us coming together to overcome COVID-19 is that we've come together closer and stronger, and we've got to work together in some unique ways that we didn't get a chance to before the pandemic. And that's why my friends are joining me here on the panel today. There's Candace Batiste and Keith Hansen. So we've always had a relationship and worked together in different ways, but, you know, we've also been siloed by the nature of our work. You know, it's still a business. And so none of us work for the same employers or the same businesses. And so a lot of times we struggle to find time during the week and find projects where we can kind of combine, you know, our efforts and what we see. So, you know, that's kind of the bittersweet part of COVID-19 is we probably got to work together a little bit more than we have before. And we're excited about that part. And so I guess we'll just kind of spin the wheel.
Yeah, well, I was going to say who got in contact with who first. So who was the first person that reached out and to whom? So did you reach out to your colleagues that you've worked with before, or did they reach out to you and were like, okay, we got an extra special problem, COVID's happening, of course we'll be working together?
Yeah, you ever try to call somebody and the line's busy because they're trying to call you? That's how all these people were on the panel with me now. So we were all like, hey man, I was just thinking about you. We need to get this and that going. So like Candace was probably the closest to me when this happened because we were fighting another social issue with the census outreach. Mm-hmm. We had come up with a way to combine digital literacy with the census because it was going online for the first year. And that was our disaster that we saw that it was more of a quiet disaster, not like the pandemic where we saw how that could eliminate, you know, districts and lead to gerrymandering of districts. And
right.
Yeah, so I'll let Candace take it away. We kind of connected at the beginning of the pandemic.
And you're Candace, you're at the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. Is that correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
All right, tell us about your work.
Sure. So the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice is a statewide organization that seeks to uplift and amplify the voices of those who are in low resource communities, those who usually are not at the table having their voices heard. And we're also one of the 2020 census partners. And so that's how me and Demetrius got connected, because I knew that was some of the work that they were going to be doing some of that same work. And one of the things you'll always hear him say is the need for us to eliminate these silos, how we have multiple organizations that are working on the same thing, but it's possible that we don't even know each other. And so for us, it was about trying to, again, you know, get rid of that silo, but also being able to bring sort of an educational perspective to the census that many people just didn't know about already. You know, people understand the need for political representation when it comes to getting out the vote and showing up to vote, but the census was a little bit of a different animal. And some of that comes from it not being an annual thing. It only comes around every 10 years. And so oftentimes, more often than not, people don't even remember the impact of it or the importance of it because it was 10 years ago. And so when we got together, we foresaw that there was going to be an issue with the digital divides that we have here in the city, and with the census going online for the first time. We knew the census was relying heavily on people responding online, and we knew we couldn't just allow that to be the information that was put out there without also addressing the fact that we have these digital gaps here, and how do we go about, you know, fixing that? And so then COVID hit, and it was like, well, you know, we tried to tell you all that with these digital gaps, we are going to be dealing with some issues that have just become more exacerbated now. And thankfully, the city was able to come together. Makerspace led the charge on what needed to be done regarding addressing those gaps that we have. And we've actually been able to increase our response rate just by acknowledging that there have to be alternative ways for people to fill out the census and for them to just get involved and understand the need for better political representation.
So, I mean, that's really interesting. The idea of, I think when people, Demetrius, when you first said this even to me, I wasn't really thinking about maker spaces participating in trying to make sure that the census was accurate and also helping with the digital divide problem, right? But it makes perfect sense, right? So you're already a community organization, you're a Fab Lab, you're serving your community, you're already tied in with people. And you already have digital fabrication tools and other digital tools like computers that folks can use to fill out their census, right? So it makes perfect sense now that you're saying it. But I think a lot of people and a lot of spaces that are that are participating in this call or listening to us or listening to this later will be like, wow, how did you get involved? And what made you, like, what inspired you to actually even think about the makerspace in that way? And I guess what steps can a makerspace take? I know it seems like it might be quite simple, but how do you connect with, the akin organizations? So I'm assuming there's somebody similar to you, maybe not exactly similar to you, Candace, but maybe there are other people that are serving in positions like yours in other states and other counties around the country. How do we get tapped in with the other Candaces in the world?
So I think one of the ways is to, and I don't know if you were asking me that or Demetrius.
To both, whoever wants to answer, it's a free-for-all.
I want Candace to take this one.
Okay, I think it comes with first, something that I had to learn, which is we sort of try to divorce ourselves from tech and think that that's completely something separate from any type of social justice initiative. And then you also have sort of that technophobia when you have volunteers and maybe even people on staff who are a little bit older, and they're like, well, we don't really need to worry about that thing. And now that thing is what everybody has to deal with. And so I think maybe the first step is realizing that you may end up working with groups or organizations that you would not have necessarily thought aligned with what you were trying to do. But I think what helped me was being able to sort of tease out the overlap and the similarities that we had when it came to like reaching people in our community. And we knew one of the ways that we would be able to do that is bridging that digital divide and getting people to understand the importance of the census when it came to even something like internet infrastructure and being able to provide, federal dollars for something like that, and getting people to understand that the census is really about making sure that each of these communities get their fair share of that pie. And so sometimes it's really about breaking down those barriers that you think are in place because, what they're doing over there has nothing to do with what I'm doing over here. But really, if you sit down and you figure out, like, we need all of the federal dollars we can get to be able to make our homes a little bit better, then you realize that there are different approaches and different organizations that can help you achieve that. For example, whenever we talk to people about the census with Power Coalition and with the Makerspace, we start talking about the schools and these federal programs for people to be able to get a higher education, and like how does that work with the census? And the way that we tell them that is because your schools are receiving federal dollars. You need to make sure you count your children, because even though they might be 2 or 3 years old now, in 10 years, that person will be 12 or 13 and maybe going to a school where they now have some type of STEM program. You want to be able to help them connect the dots. And I think that's sort of the second wave, is not only educating ourselves within these organizations, but making sure we know enough to be able to connect the dots for those in the community so they get it too. I'll let Demetrius sort of talk about the refurbishment program with the devices and whatnot they have. But as soon as I saw that they were doing that, I was like, this makes perfect sense. When we're pulling in volunteers to call people about the census and reminding them, many times people want to get involved, but they don't have the equipment to be able to do it the way that we're getting used to doing it now because of COVID. So these people who now have these devices, they're not just being able to use them for school and for work, but they're now able to be engaged in their communities in a way that they weren't before, simply because they just didn't have the device to be able to do so. We've noticed that our communities want to be involved and they want to be engaged. And when we give them the tools and resources to do that, they actually show up.
That's awesome. And I think one of the things that you're saying that's also really interesting is there's a virtuous cycle, right? So like by participating, by a maker organization or any community organization participating in the efforts that are around the census, we get the data to then help those organizations succeed, right? Because we know how many people are using services, how many people are around in a particular area that are in need of other services. So it allows us to be more accurate. And I think all of us know what the census is about, but like you said, it happens every 10 years. So we kind of like forget about it, and then it's back again. You're like, oh yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
You need to count it. Be counted. It's so important. So I guess I'm wondering, Keith, you're the person, so you're Shreveport's, I don't know why, guys, I'm having such a difficult time speaking tonight, but Shreveport's first chief technology officer. And so you're obviously involved in trying to make sure that Shreveport does have the infrastructure to do, IT and to become, you've done the work that, is setting up Shreveport to become a smart city. So I'd love to hear about sort of your engagement, how you got involved with this, group and what work you're doing that overlaps and how you see the makerspace being a part of that as well. And Demetrius, I know you're sort of the thread that goes between all of these different individuals, so feel free also, and everyone else feel free to share your input as well.
No, y'all are flowing perfectly because there's like a web of interconnectivity among us. We've all met, and Candace and Bionica have connected, and Keith and Bionica and it's, so I mean, there's no wrong way you can go with this as far as on the question. That's why I love them being on the panel. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I first met Demetrius before I was CTO. I was running my own company almost a decade at that point, and I'll be honest, it was to the point where there wasn't a lot of work for me to do anymore as a founder and CEO. I was selling and I was getting deals and things were good. And so I'd get pretty bored. And when I'm bored, it's a bad day. So I started really looking at our core problems as a business, which was talent. I always needed to find talented software developers, which when you start looking at the census data, the number of graduates in Shreveport City proper was so abysmally low. And you're mostly getting the expected, background and experience and demographic, largely white male, not a lot of female, definitely not a lot of minorities in technology. In fact, I think it was like 5 years in where we hired our first non-white male into our company. There was a few here and there that were like internships and things like that, but we were a pretty homogenous group, and it wasn't like I wasn't trying to find people, but I think there was a lot of stigma around our company because of it. And so my goal, as well as we just needed good people to work on good projects. And so a lot of my career in the company was trying to figure out, how do I stimulate from my seat as a private business? How do I grow the output of software developers here? And so I would go into schools and we started up, after school camps and clubs and things like that. And then through all of that work, it got me introduced into Step Forward and that alliance. And then Step Forward introduced me, in earnest. I had, bumped into Demetrius before, but then we actually sat down and we talked about everything that he was working on and that he was doing and that I was doing. And there was just a lot of threads that cross. I will say he was a lot more outspoken about a lot of the issues than I ever was, so he kind of took that side of the coin where I was trying to see what I could do internal to schools. And then we connected on his robotics programs and like all kinds of stuff, and kind of tried to fight the fight on cybersecurity curriculum and the STEM Alliance. And like, I just remember all those conversations together where we were like, this isn't right. We need to fix it, you know? But, you know, as I got more and more involved in the community, I just realized that there was like, you really need the support of your electeds in the community to make major change. And to really galvanize, you know, a citizenry. And so I ran for office. I actually ran for a city council position, lost horribly. You know, Candace is probably laughing because I think she told me don't run independent.
I would have voted for you if I was.
I am laughing.
Okay, good.
I'm definitely laughing.
Yep. Lesson learned, because basically you get to the door and, you know, you offend everybody. Like,
He had swagger, though. He had that bow tie game with the vest.
What's that?
You looked like you were gonna win. You had that bow tie with the vest. He had swagger. He's like the most swagged out tech proficient like council candidate. I think he was just kind of ahead of his time, honestly, because all the stuff he was talking about doing, he ended up doing as chief technology officer after the mayor won. So it worked out anyway.
Yeah, it was a great story. I'm in the Mully Grubs. I've just lost. I'm just, you know, despairing at this point, and I lost big, like big. And so, you know, 2 days go by, and I'm just like, I don't know what I'm gonna do now. Like, you know, how can I make change, etc. And then I'm, you know, mulling over all my options with a colleague over lunch, and I get this. I had met the mayor, then, you know, candidate on the campaign trail 3 times, and that's as much interaction as I'd had with him. And then out of the blue, I'm at lunch, you know, kind of weeping over my next steps and recovering with another tech peer of mine, and I get this text message from then candidate Adrian Perkins, but like was looking like he was probably going to win. And he said, "What do you think about being the first chief technology officer for Shreveport?" And it literally checked every single box of mine. Like, oh, I'm giving back. I get to run a big team. I've got a bigger budget than I've ever had to do amazing things, which it's not the truth. I have a tiny budget for what I want to do, right? But and then you know, I get to work on these initiatives that I'm out here campaigning and knocking doors for, talking about open data portals and transparency and more internet connectivity for people, and all of these things that I'm out there pitching as a council candidate, when in reality it was going to be the IT director anyway, right, that would have to actually implement all this stuff. And so when he asked me, I jumped at the chance. It was an awful decision to make, to have to leave my company of a decade, leave my partners there. You know, I could have kept those positions. You know, a lot of people have side hustles in government, but I just didn't want any sort of conflict of interest or anything like that to hinder anything I could do potentially, right? And so they're still going strong. They're doing a really good job without me. Thankfully, I would have probably cried in my cereal bowl every morning if things didn't turn out well. And then now today, you know, they've given me the task of everything from managing our Exchange email servers and overseeing the council chamber audio for hybrid Zoom meetings and figuring all that out, all the way to universal affordable broadband for our city, and trying to turn, you know, our very dumb infrastructure into a smart infrastructure, you know, some way, somehow. And so I will say that I'm excited every day I wake up and tired every day I go to sleep. So,
I have one question, Keith. This is an interesting way that you framed this dumb infrastructure and trying to put smart tech into the city. And really, when you're framing it in that way, it's that our cities have not caught up to the needs that we have. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has really brought forward, particularly in education, and I'd love to hear if any of you have thoughts around this, is that everybody is more in need of the smart city than they ever have been before, because libraries are closed. We've talked to a lot of, we did a panel on library makerspaces, and they were talking about the fact that they provide work placement opportunities for people just by virtue of providing them with access to the kind of technology that gives them information, or allows them to complete an application. And they do this for students who don't have internet infrastructure. I think there's been a lot of interesting information coming out about people driving, 2 miles to hotspots to sit at the hotspot to be able to complete their high school homework. So, the time has really come that's brought, all of these things to the forefront all at the same time. And I wondered if all of you could talk about that. Maybe Bionica, you have some experience with that, working with the community college, and, when our public resources go away, what steps in?
Sure. Great. I'd love to talk about that. Well, one of the things that Keith mentioned that really brought us all together was this nucleus called the North Louisiana STEM Alliance. And that is a group of individuals who are STEM enthusiasts in the area. You've got K-12, post-secondary, universities, you've got faith-based organizations, nonprofits, government officials, just everyone who all collectively share this same zeal and passion for STEM and education, right? So we have served over 72,000 people in our community, just extending specifically to the underrepresented populations, but high quality STEM experiences so that they will be ready and people can be prepared for the 21st century workforce, because it's going to look very different. But we have been thinking we had a little time, right? About 10, 15 years. Well, now that's jumped up. It's like right now, but I was on a conference today, and technically it's 5 years. What we predicted would happen in 15 years because of the pandemic is going to happen in now. So it is more imperative that people get trained and have access to training to be able to work and to live and to make a sustaining wage, a work wage. And so the STEM Alliance allows us to work together. Demetrius reached out to me right after the pandemic happened and said, hey, we need to make face shields. And so, I got with some professors at the school and we 3D printed some face shields. So these are things that we do. This is just the kind of typical nature of how the STEM Alliance work. But one of the things that, we've been challenged with is making sure that people in our community, especially when I think about that K-12 population, have access and get opportunities to, understand how to use, devices and have devices in their homes, because right now that is what their education looks like. And so with the work that we're all doing together, we've been able to do that. And at the college, we've been able to, we pivoted rather quickly. We were able to stay online and open and available to our students. We have, turned everything pretty much virtually. We have some hybrid options, which means most of the theoretical pieces of their classroom curriculum is done online. But then we do have some labs open. That's kind of where the makerspace can come in. I work on the economic and workforce development side of the college. So I work with work-based learning and apprenticeships. So the pandemic is an issue for me because hands-on learning can't happen, right? But with places like the makerspace, if my students need to do a welding project and don't have access to our campus, as long as they're social distancing and being responsible, they can go to the makerspace and have access to equipment and tools so that they can continue their education. We've also worked with, like the DHH to make sure that our nursing students and allied health students had some adjustments made to their clinical hours so that they could still graduate on time, because those are our essential workers, right? And so our essential workers really did need that hands-on training. So it's really important that we continue this work. I actually lost 2 people out of my apprenticeship program because they live in a rural area, rural East Texas, where they don't have access to broadband internet. And you can do class online, but you can't do PLCs, advanced PLCs online and things like that. So we still have a lot of work together. But, I'm not a subject matter expert. I'm not like Keith and Demetrius. I'm not a techie. But I did teach 5th grade science for a number of years. So I do know how important it is to give kids the foundational experiences so that they can continue in these types of programs, and how important it is for business, industry, community, and education to work together so that people can have access.
The important part I need, because my makers need to eat, they need to work. And so,
Right.
having people like you and Keith and even Candace, collectively, I've utilized all three of you to find income opportunities for my members. And, when I talk with Dorothy and the others about, how I'm able to keep our cost of membership down, how I'm able to have so much diversity in the makerspace with Black people, women, Asian, Latino, you name it. The way I'm able to work with low income and do so much makerspace stuff with people that normally are, I think I've shared the link, Pink Elephant in the Room, by Ms. Dorothy, where we talk about these huge gaping disparities in the maker spaces across the country. I didn't even realize that that was such a thing because, we're the first maker space in our area. And of course, I'm Black and I started it. So we're inherently diverse. And, other people from my community feel comfortable coming into our space. But I didn't even realize it was a thing because I just read about this great thing that makerspace is doing, this awesome concept. And I looked at our needs here in Shreveport and the things I know that we're trying to overcome challenge-wise. And I'm like, of course we should have this. And of course it should be diverse because I was like, I know several Black communities we can help with this. And I see how women could benefit from this. All of the women entrepreneurs on Etsy that are transcending barriers economically for women through Etsy, like a $1 billion industry. So I'm just like, yeah, we need to take some of this maker city stuff around the country and like creative class cities, sprinkle some of that on Shreveport and Louisiana, some of our economic woes. And like with Bianca, like when I talk to her, some of the jobs she has available, when I go talk to elected officials and leaders, they don't know anything about the tech jobs that Bianca has a whole bag of. But like our K-12 schools, a lot of our college programs, they don't really prepare people for their career pathway. We have a lot of these dead-end career pathways where we're preparing people for jobs that don't exist anymore. Like General Motors is gone. We don't have a car plant. We will not have a car plant anytime in the future. We do have a surviving remnant of General Electric that actually produces the transformers for New York, does about 90% of New York City's transformers here in Shreveport, which a lot of our leaders don't know. Bianca handles the apprenticeship program for them. And correct me if I'm wrong, they hire 18 and up, no degree. And when I toured the plant, they have these people operating CNC machines, huge CNC mills, cutting out parts to build the transformers. And that's how they were able to sustain General Electric in Shreveport. That's a huge story, right? That's a huge economic driver. We have Bentler Steel that day one, they helped build this training center at BIPC. They need people also 18 and up, not necessarily a degree path. You can talk to them about the career opportunities in tech.
Sure. Something interesting about that too is the pandemic has really hurt a lot of our companies because they have experienced layoffs. So Louisiana is a state that depends heavily on oil and gas. And we all have had while the rest of the world is enjoying going to the gas pump and getting the cheap gas, it's devastating our communities. So we do have, an apprenticeship program at the community college. We sponsor it. We have 2 positions, an industrial maintenance technician and an electrical technician. And basically the company will pay for students to go through, a program where they're getting their associate's degree and they're learning while they earn. Of course, like I said before, a lot of companies are undergoing layoffs. Libby Glass is a member of our apprenticeship program. They work with us. We have students in that program. Well, they're one of the companies that filed bankruptcy over the pandemic, and I don't know if they'll remain open. I think that they won't. So that is devastating. So more so than training students to a specific job, training them to skill sets, letting them learn how to do certain things so that they can work things that are transferable. So the apprenticeship program, the electrical technician and an industrial maintenance technician, that's highly transferable. So there's a Bentler Steel here, but there's a Bentler Steel in Michigan. There's tons of places in Texas that they could go to work. We don't want to go to Texas. We want to stay in Louisiana because we're training people to stay here, but really wanting to focus on giving people the opportunities to go into programs where they can get gain a skill set that will allow them to really work anywhere. We also, over the pandemic, I had JF at Jobs for the Future came to me about doing a Google IT program. And Keith, thank you for your support for this program. It's a entry-level IT certificate, and they actually paid us to extend this to the community. So they really wanted us to focus on the underrepresented population, people who did not have access, very little IT experience, but it's going to give them a kind of well-rounded opportunity. But one of the focuses with this is not just giving them that skill, but engaging industry to partner them so that they can get a job. So really wanting to make sure students and people in our community gain the skill set so that they can come to work here in our state so that our economy can strive. And I was at a conference today, Demetrius, you'll find this very interesting. Texas actually has tech labs that are now through federal funding associated with the community colleges, because specifically right now, my apprentices, they have to do welding, they have to do PLCs 1, 2, and 3. They've got to do motor controls, they got to do print transmission. Well, now with social distancing, they can't do that on our campus full time. We do have the hybrid classes, but we can't have classrooms full of students. While it's important that we have this whole ecosystem of training sites and availability opportunities in town. And Demetrius has taken on several of our students for interns, and we're trying to push him a whole bunch more because they want experience. You have to be able to touch things and to feel it and to be engaged in some sort of workforce to be able to get a job when they graduate. So we thank you.
So I got to step in here. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Keith.
Okay, cool. Because I've heard some amazing things here. All right, Candace, she's on camera. So I've heard us talk about the economy and how it's being hurt and how it's changed here in Shreveport. We have less manufacturing than we ever have. My grandfather was in Shreveport at GM. He was floor manager. He was union. He was all these things that he believed in. And then now they're gone, right? And so there's a lot of people displaced from that. So I've been struggling for pretty much my career trying to figure out here in Shreveport, how do I get this number of technology people up? And then COVID hits and we have connectivity issues. We've got computing challenges. I like to say useful computing versus just any computing. Like you could do stuff on a phone, but trying to learn how to apply to a job on your phone is really hard. That's not a useful computing device in many different circumstances. And so in a lot of respects, I'm like woven into a lot of economic development discussion because it's one of the top 3 goals. It's, economic development, public safety, and technology are the mayor's top 3 goals. And so there's a lot of discussion around these things. And when we start thinking about what we can do in the economy wise, like how do we shift? How do we get people doing jobs that are good paying, and how do we get them placed? When you start thinking about the typical economic development directive, it's go find big company, court them to a building, find some subsidiary or some subsidies for them to buy the building and build it, and then populate it with people and hire all of our people, right? Which is fantastic, and I'm glad that happens. But it's a whale. That's a giant multi-year effort, right? So what happens if now that we're all stuck at home, if we can start training people on technology skills, get them the computing devices, get them the internet connections, get them the skills. And when I hear for, what is it, like a decade now, the West Coast companies saying they want diversity. Well, we've got half our population as majority minority, right? And so why can't we skill that up? Also, a big part of that population is under the poverty line, right? And so you're talking $30,000 and below, right? And so, if we can start training these guys and gals to learn how to remote work, and I'm talking any remote work, anything with a keyboard and a mouse that they can sit down and get on. Fiverr, if you can teach them how to do that. If I can teach somebody how to earn $100 extra a month when they're earning only $800 a month, $10,000 and below sort of average salary income in some places. If I can teach them how to earn another $100, that's going to help everything, right? And then if we can show those remote companies that we've got a huge workforce of remote capable workers that are, and we could become known for having a huge pool of reliable workforce that can work remotely. Like, that's the pivot that I see our city taking if we get this right? If we can all come together as a community and gather the funds and get the people who can hang things on poles and like build sensors and turn this around that way, I think that's the major pivot that we could do. It's almost like hacking economic development when you can basically export a talent and import tax revenue. Like, that's the way I see it.
That's exactly, yeah, absolutely. I think that's
without a lot of expensive capital costs, right?
Exactly. Like, we
I think that this is a key important thing, right? Because we've all been hit. And I mean, certainly some places, and you've obviously, said, Shreveport has been hit because of the type of work that is done in Shreveport and because of the industries that are lively in that area, right? So there are areas of our country that are hit harder in this particular scenario than others, but we're all hit, right, hard. And if you think about what the power of, really this community-based approach of really working together, all these different groups. And in some ways, one of the exciting things about bringing you all on to this call that's really facing sort of the maker community is really one of the things that Nation of Makers, I know personally, we really encourage and make community as well, is to really engage with your actual community, that you're not alone. Like, the makerspace isn't just some place that is by itself, right? You exist within a community and you're there to serve the community in some ways. And the way that you serve your community is by providing tools and technologies, access to education in different ways that's maybe non-formalized education, right? But education nonetheless, and other types of skill development. And I think it only makes sense, like, to partner with your local community college and workforce development programs and apprenticeship programs, to talk to the person that's running all of the IT infrastructure and the technology infrastructure for your city, to really think about how that makes sense, to talk to the people that are working on, community equity and making sure that everyone is actually counted and heard, and, their voices are heard, and that their needs are actually being met by the community that they live in. And I think it's such a beautiful model, right? And I know you guys are like, we're still a work in progress, and you've already, told us all these great things that you're working on doing, which is really exciting. But I know for me, I'm excited to listen and to think that other communities like Shreveport, because Shreveport, even though it is unique and it's awesome, right, in the way that it is, it's similar to other places in the country in sort of its demographics and its concerns, and some of the ways that certain industries have left, like Demetrius said, and others have come in. So I think there's just a really beautiful American story in a way about how we survive and how we're resilient in the face of not just a pandemic, but any challenge, right? And if we're able to figure out how to work together to kind of get ourselves out of it, right, how much stronger we are. So I just, I'm like so enjoying this conversation and everything that you're doing. And I'm like 100%ing everything that you're saying about making sure that we have these programs and these training opportunities. And, I think one thing that you just brought up was this idea of being remote. And I think a lot of folks are like, well, if all of our spaces are closed and we don't have access to normal things, and normal sort of procedures, how do we still get trained? And I think you guys have just actually discussed some ways that could still happen, and
you hold it up to the screen and say, is this the right soldering point? Like, do I do this the right way? That's what I was doing.
That is one way. And we actually had a number of people. Was it last week we had the kits? I can't remember. I'm losing track.
No, it was the week before.
But we have educational kits and other kits that are available, and we focused mostly on educational kits in that particular viewing and panel. But, there are ways to, obviously share equipment to train folks in different ways to emulate and model, right, what you can do. But I think it all starts with that technology, right? So
I had a quick question. Sorry to cut you out there, Dorothy, but one of the things I wondered, just in all of your organizations, because you're kind of coming at it from different angles, and one of the things that we've heard as we've been doing these episodes, more at the beginning when they were very focused on COVID and maker spaces and this kind of community activism that developed around wanting to help, create PPE. But I think it's equally true of people coming in to help fix computers, for people learning how to become census takers. I used to be a census taker, so I know what it's like to go out into the community and to do that, and to do it on the paper end, and then also have to kind of go into the back end and the data collection and the value of that. So one of the things is, you also are creating an opportunity for someone to experience, something that we may all find familiar for the first time. And to get to say, oh, I didn't know I could come into this space and do this. Maybe it's a person who's good at sewing. I mean, this is the one that's kind of been a gateway. But I'm just kind of interested in what you guys see as those gateway experiences that help people engage with the kind of ideas that you're talking about that lead to the programs that actually can make change. Because I do think one of the things that Dorothy, and the second part is that I'm interested in hearing about the rural areas that surround you, because you're the small city inside a relatively rural parish. And I was recently on a trip through the Intermountain West, where we've seen, as we've done this trip a number of times, internet access and phone access decline over the last kind of 10 years that we've been doing it, poorer and poorer connectivity in places where people are driving hundreds of miles to get to things. But it's the same. It doesn't really matter the distance. So I'd love to hear about those kind of two things, people coming into your spaces for the first time and communicating and participating, but also how you have outreach to people who are, around you rurally, especially for the census, because that's an interesting question.
Can I answer just sort of the first part of that? Because I grew up in a rural area. I'm from a very small town called Houghton. And so my parents still live out there too. And one of the ways that I was able to, oh, you're from Houghton? Oh yeah. So
I got the good stuff. I got good internet though. You see that?
Good people come from that small town then.
We're high speed over here, honey. We're high speed now. No, I'm just kidding. It is very rural.
It is. And my parents still use satellite internet. And I don't know if you all have not ever had any experience with that. It's awful. I mean, any type of cloud coverage, and it's like, okay, you're not going to be able to stream anything. You can barely check your email. But one of the ways I was able to get some of the rural community members involved, like get them to know who your public service commissioner is, and getting them to understand that we could actually be looking at internet as a public utility, especially now because of everyone needing it. And there's some legislation that's already out there that is supposed to be prioritizing funding to help get Wi-Fi into those rural communities. And so getting people to understand that it goes beyond who's at the top of the ballot, but that this public service commissioner who is not only, championing Wi-Fi in rural areas, and it's something that me and Demetrius talk about, because we also need to make sure we're prioritizing the urban core too, but also getting them to understand that this public service commissioner is the reason that your utilities were not cut off when they lifted the moratorium for, utility cutoffs. And so that's something that sort of gets people some buy-in, because I didn't know who my public service commissioner was 5 years ago, let alone, 10 years ago. But this person actually determines things in your house from month to month. And so that has been sort of a way that I've been able to touch some rural folks, getting them to understand that even though they're not really the ones that are talked about when you do traditional canvassing, they're not the ones that you talk to on the doors, because there's acres apart, they're acres apart from their neighbor. It's still important for them to be engaged. And as soon as you tell people, hey, you could be involved in a way that means that you don't have to use satellite internet to be able to watch whatever you like to watch, they're like, oh, well, okay, I can show up to vote for that if it means I can watch Game of Thrones without interruption. So, you got to find where that connect is and just be able to leverage it.
Absolutely. And we actually partnering on the census effort with Power Coalition and NWLA Makerspace. We actually had, like, on our free Makerspace days as part of our Fab Lab certification, we partnered with the regional office for the census that does here in Louisiana. They're housed out of Atlanta. And we've actually brought them down to our census outreach programs. And we made it like our maker meetups have been census outreach. We've had the census people there, and we've actually had the census people come inside our makerspace and actually, you know, do the census outreach here. And they said exactly what you said, like, oh, we didn't know that this is a thing. And so, you know, the census workers are learning about the makerspace, the makers are learning about the census, and it's just been quite an exciting, constant learning kind of thing. And then I get emails about grants. We actually just got some additional funding through Power Coalition and the National Council of Civic Organizations to do phone banking and census outreach so that we'll extend to our makers and constituents. So we're doing maker stuff with them and donating computers to them and doing the census outreach, just all in one big pot of gumbo is how it's working. We're kind of passing that ball back and forth. And then Keith is there. Keith is awesome. We're working on some digital divide research that we're going to put up a big website for. And we're going to call out kind of the census, how that became part of this gap. And we're going to talk about some other disparities and really the need for defining the need properly and calling it out in data. Because when we talk to those big internet companies, like some of the ones that sponsor us, the discussion we end up having about expanding the internet access in low income and in rural areas, it turns into a data conversation. The demand uptake, you know, the adoption rate once they spend the money and build it out. Are people actually getting the internet once we build the access so they can recoup the funds? I'll give that to Keith. It turns into a data thing.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know if you've ever tried to ask an ISP representative for customer data, but that's competitive information, and they don't ever want it to end up in a public record request, and they don't want that outside of their building. And so it's very rare that I actually see true adoption statistics. Now it's interesting. I will be honest. Every time I talk to a telecom, I scope the conversation. I don't care about anything but Shreveport. Okay. So I don't care about Caddo. I don't care about East Texas. I don't care about any of that. I care about my city, and that's what I'm here for. So let's keep the conversation there. I am glad that other people are thinking about that. Obviously, Caddo schools, which affects all of Shreveport, is huge, right? And that geography is massive. But one of the things that I've found, so when I got started, I was tasked to figure out universal broadband. Well, I knew that I'm not going to be able to build an ISP in Louisiana from the city standpoint as a public utility like our water company. It's legislated against at this point. Like, it's not illegal, but you have to go through so many steps to even get to the point where a vote happens to allow it, that you have to vote just to have a consultant. And then the consultant is appointed to you and you don't get to pick, and then you have to pay them. And then they go through all these steps to figure out whether or not you can even put a vote up to get municipal internet, but you have to be profitable on day one. You cannot use tax funds from anything else. I mean, it's basically all but dead, right? And so I have to be very judicial with any sort of expansion of connectivity. And as a city, I know that we have better connectivity in our more affluent neighborhoods than we otherwise do. Because look, we've got all these activist communities that are telling me that we have a digital divide and we need access. Well, so my first thought is like, well, dang, like cable's everywhere it's supposed to be, you know, like everybody should have cable TV, like, so they should have a cable internet, right? And that's the case in Shreveport. We have 99.9% access to cable. This is what the ISPs tell me. It's hard to verify. If you go and look at the FCC maps, one census block, if one subscriber is on that census block, then the entire census block is rated as having broadband. And so that was like week one when I started researching that I realized how crappy our maps are. And they don't tell me anything about who actually has internet, just access, right? And so let's assume then that we have access everywhere. It is arguable that Shreveport, the city, the core, does have access everywhere to cable or DSL, one of the two, then what about, like, why is there still a digital divide then? And the only answer is that it's too expensive for our populations that are low SES and low resource. And it's thorny, right? Like when you think about it, let's say you solve the internet connection with a hotspot. Well, do they have a useful computing device? Have they ever used a keyboard and a mouse? Probably the kids. Have the parents? Do they know what they're going to do on these things? Well, how much is it to actually connect? Let's say you get a hotspot and it's providing Wi-Fi. Well, now you've got to either buy a laptop, which in general, you're $400 to $800 on the cheaper end of things. If you don't have access to a laptop, well, now you got a tower, a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse. You're starting to stack up to like $1,000 to $1,200 budget on getting outfitted for the first time ever, when in large part, the responses you get back when you ask, why don't you, it's either I can't afford it or I don't see the need. And so you're fighting an education battle at that point. But it's, in my opinion, it's mostly an affordability. And the only way you get that affordable is that you introduce competition. And a misnomer in general, like a misconception in general, is that municipalities dictate where ISPs go. We do not. Anybody can. Demetrius tomorrow, which I've literally encouraged this, but Demetrius tomorrow could start his own wireless ISP, and you'd have the full support of the government as long as you pay your fees, right? And the fees are based on customers. So if you got 0 customers, you're paying $0 to set up your infrastructure, right? So anyone and everyone can start an ISP, but when you start an ISP, the economics of it are tragic. Like you're dumping capital literally into pipes in the ground to get wires out to a neighborhood that may not buy it, right? And then when I'm in front of we were getting a big presentation from all the telcos, a whole bunch of CIOs around the table in Louisiana. They all flew in from all these other cities. And they get up there and they're starting to talk about all this fiber expansion. I said, well, are you going to the poor communities? Are you going to our low resource communities? Well, we've got, who pays for that? I said, you do. Like you pay for that, right? Because you're good people, right? And they're like, no, we're a private business, And I said, well, that's fine. You can be a private business, but don't get in here acting like you're saving the world when you're leaving half of it out, And it's just super frustrating talking to private business when I'm like, yeah, I know that's the argument, but if you don't start it, then no one's going to adopt it. And then we keep this vicious, drain happening on our communities, and you're never going to get out of this. So like, of all the people who could fix these problems, ISPs are the one that could, right? But when you start looking at their challenges, they have old infrastructure. It costs money to upgrade. They know they're not going to see the return on it for probably as long as the lifespan of the upgrade. And it's a non-starter. They can't do it, right? Not if their bottom line matters to them. And that's where a city should be stepping in my opinion. That's why I think municipal ISPs exist, is because they're not profit motivated. I get to look at every single citizen as equal, whether they can afford it or not, right? And so there's a lot going on our side that's trying to, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We got to get connectivity out to people. I can't wait for legislature to change. We've got to do something else, right? And so we're exploring all these crazy ways to do it. But
well, in some ways, it's kind of funny because I think it brings up something that Jen said earlier, which is like, in some ways, the pandemic, as horrible as it is, brings to light a bunch of urgency around issues that had been urgent. It's not like this became more urgent, but it brings to light, sort of that this problem is real, and that if we don't do something, there are large ramifications, especially when we start to stack problem upon problem upon problem on top of each other. Yeah, I know Jen had a question. I actually have a question for you because I know one of your hobbies, or not hobbies, but you're a maker yourself, and that you toy around with Raspberry Pis and sort of low cost devices. And I actually was curious as you were talking, one thing that I was thinking about is, to your point that people may not have more expensive pieces of technology, would there be an avenue to having sort of more access to low cost computing technologies and training on things like Raspberry Pis that could be used as small computers to do basic things, including job training and some of the other things that we talked about on this call? And I actually, given that you're an aficionado of Raspberry Pi yourself, I was curious if you thought that that could be a feasible strategy, that like a makerspace, like NWLA makerspace, or that the community college could actually implement in some ways.
So I not only believe that it's possible, but I've already started submitting it.
Are you working on it?
Yeah, so this is a Crow Pi case. We got 125 of these from the International Youth Foundation. The company gave us an amazing deal on 125 of these. But you've got all these buttons and all these sensors and a screen, and you just hook up a mouse and a keyboard to it, right? And then you plug in a Raspberry Pi. And so we're going to start working with students hand selected throughout our district by the schools, and then try as often as possible to pair them up with tech mentors, and then hand these out and start teaching them how to use this stuff. Not only that, I often get looked at like I've got three heads on my neck, because one of the problems that I have in IT is that we spend as a city an inordinate amount of money doing hardware refreshes, right? When in reality, 90% of our user base is using a browser, Excel, and Word, right? And in all, functional scenarios, like that's what they need. They need a keyboard, a mouse, a monitor, and something that can do browsing, right? And so I've argued we could get rid of virus protection. I could get rid of a whole bunch of software assurance costs all over the city if we just deployed Raspberry Pis to desktops and had them network boot off of our drives. And then they just, you connect into network drives or you use SharePoint online. And then anything local is disappearing tonight, right? And so this, it secures things as well. So I'm actually proposing, which I'll get my arms and legs ripped off if I do this, but I'm actually proposing that we replace computers with Raspberry Pi desktops that we could just swap out a $60 part every couple of years. Because if it's cheap enough, it doesn't matter if it breaks in a year. I'm still spending less than my 5-year refresh cycle. When you look at total cost of ownership of all this, it makes sense.
It does. And another thing to add on to that, Keith, I was in California last year and they used gaming, just basic gaming as something to interest people in a skill that they could turn over into, a certification. They used Raspberry Pi in their gaming classes, in their high school gaming classes, and they found a way for them to get college credit. But it is something that'll prepare them for the workforce. And Keith did a program called Minecraft U before he was a government official, and we partnered with him and we offered these Minecraft university classes at BIPSI for kids. And my daughter took it and she learned, the ins and outs of Minecraft. And so she's playing, but she's coding and she's programming.
And there's a lot of those programs. I know my daughter, I have an 11-year-old, and she just took one of the Roblox, sort of coding classes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I've got a Roblox expert here.
Yeah.
Got approved as an IBC, City of Shreveport. We're going to write some letters. That's how you get people trained. That's how you develop your pipeline. Find what they like to do. Even you think about the rural areas when they say, oh, we don't have internet. I bet somebody's playing PS4. Let's figure out what they're doing. How are they getting access to do that? And kids are so smart. My son, I would go upstairs and they would have everything hooked up to his PS4 in our media room. And I'm like, what is happening? But they're playing, but, we could work together to make sure that the hackathons, those are really cool things, events where people are really playing and making, and this is a hobby, but they also can learn a skill that can pay them.
I gotta cut in here because you're stomping all over my stomping grounds here. I say this all the time in here and City Hall. If you look at somebody who's never used a computer before, and the first time they're about to use a computer, you're going to set them down in a library with a 1-hour time limit, and you're going to have them fill out a job application. That's one of the most stressful situations you can possibly
play, man.
And so, if that's the only opportunity people have to learn how to compute, then we're failing, right? Like
That makes people
Candy
not
push
like
it
it
out.
because it's
What's
work.
that?
That makes people not like it because it's only work.
Right.
They associate
Exactly.
technology with work. They're like,
And frustration and anxiety and stress, like
Right.
it's a
Absolutely.
Pavlovian like match there. It's like every time I sit down at a computer, I have to stress out about my whole life choices, you know, like that's
Right.
And like if we did a short survey of everybody in the room and your first ever computing experience, I guarantee you it had zero stress involved. And then your dad or mom walked away and let you play for hours while they were
That
able to
is
do
so
anything.
important.
I was burning CDs. I was burning CDs in high school, and I was playing Mortal Kombat on a computer I built from the Career Center.
Right.
And
That's
that was
awesome.
computing to me.
Right.
But that, and look at you now.
Bianca, what you just said too, though, I think it's also the inverse of making sure that children understand some of the things that they're doing are actually computing, that they're translatable skills, not scaring them with it, you know, because, you know, if you're 10 years old, you shouldn't have to think about your career track in that crazy way right then and there and making your decisions about life. But I think, you know, connecting it with saying, like, if you love this, you know, you might enjoy coding, or you might enjoy, you know, these other technology careers. And I think so much of what we do when we talk to the, you know, educators, the K-12 educators that are in maker education, is sometimes making those connections between a simple circuit exercise or something that you're working with, or a gaming activity, and some of the other career outcomes that come out of it.
You know, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot as this has moved on and as we head into the school year is that this is a ripe opportunity for kids to gain really useful experience from a young age on, and that we have to engage play, because the Zoom interface is not appropriate for young children, and you can capture their attention and they can build skills without having it be a kind of a static process of learning, you know. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember, is that I'm sure, Demetrius, you probably have kids who kind of come into your space and, you know, really get the opportunity to see what's powerful about what they can do with something that they previously perceived as being somewhat static. You know, games are inventive, but when you look inside how you make them and you get to make your own, it starts to become real. And I think that that's an interesting way to engage people to start doing something a little bit more and get invested in why they want internet technology or why they want to make with it.
Absolutely. Our makerspace is for insurance reasons and business reasons. We do one thing and do one thing well. And so we focus on 18 and up. I've done the kids robotics in the past. And so what we do is some of us, like myself, go break off and we go build up the K-12 programs on a train-the-trainer scenario. And that's when we really get to reconnect with the youth part and see those big eyes and how fun this stuff is. And it reminds us of how, you know, it's not all about just getting a job or a business plan, but, you know, sometimes we should just make a cool project just to make it. I forgot to mention, Candace is one of our OG Makerspace members now. And she's done everything here from cutting turf and GeoTV efforts, which I didn't even know you could do with a Makerspace. I'm learning. Yeah. But I come here and she's building furniture. And she's like, I'm trying to start this 3D printer. And I'm like, what? Because she was very hesitant at first, like, wait, no, I don't know. Like, what I got to do with technology? And she's evolved since she's been here. And our space is evolved. And like, this is the first time, like, maybe 100% of my makers, like members, 100% of my members have been actively involved in all our outreach.
I love
like,
it.
I've had
You're
members before that
parents.
just wanted to make. They didn't want to do any outreach, any community stuff. Now it's like, hey, I saw that post on your page. How can I help with the computers or the PPE? And it may not even be their field. And then they're over with Candace and, you know, they're helping with the voting and the census stuff. So it's been pretty awesome.
That's right.
The Maker Fair.
I met Candace at the Maker Fair. Those are great events. Those are so fun. You see biology, chemistry, technology, science. My daughter learned how to science when she was like 10 years old at the Maker Fair. So
our Maker Fair is a family engagement event. So that's when we really get more of the youth involved. We see the kids that are impacted by the trainers we train. And so that's when Huntington High School is there, and Green Oaks and the different schools we work with, and Fair Park. And they're showing off their STEM stuff and flying drones, and they're flying them with Keith, who was also there and put it up on the city page. And then Candace was there. We did this the first time before the pandemic. It was our first Maker Fair where we actually had I think it was the GOTV launch.
Oh, it's
He was like,
awesome.
I can do this at Maker Fair. I was like, well, I run the Maker Fair here in Shreveport, so yeah, you can. And so they're training.
Maker Fair is that it's different every place, and it's really encouraged that it reflects the community that you're in.
Yeah, I think also when people become mentors, you know, one of the things that I think is really key is that these kids who are getting access to these technologies and having these experiences then step into that role as they move into high school, and they, you know, kind of as you all are kind of connecting and bringing people in, that they understand that kind of giving back portion and the peer-to-peer learning, because every kid wants to learn from the cool older kid rather than from their mom or somebody else.
And their mom might teach another kid, right, who will listen to them, because sometimes other kids listen to me besides my own child, right? So I think, yeah, that's definitely true. And
you got to trick them. You got to tell your friend this.
Exactly. You
so your kid will hear
children
it.
for an afternoon. That usually is pretty effective. But guys, I hate to cut our conversation short, but I know we're running past the hour, and I do want to be respectful of all of your time. But one thing I want to say, sort of to wrap us up, is that, you know, a lot of times we inadvertently focus on major cities and the coasts of our country, and we don't really think about what's happening in the rest of the country. And I think that we're missing a lot by doing that, right? So I am really grateful to all of you for sharing what Shreveport has to offer, because I think it's something terribly special. I think that all the work that you're doing is incredibly meaningful and powerful. And the way that you work together as a community is an example for every community in the country really to look at and say, how can we do this? Like, how, you know, every makerspace should be able to call up, first of all, every city hall should have a chief technology officer, so that we can start there. But if we didn't have that, right, every makerspace, you know, should be able to reach out to somebody in city hall that is advocating for the work that they're doing. They should have, you know, contacts over in the community college and the other universities and colleges in their area. They should have friends that are working on equity and inclusion and making sure that everyone's voice is being heard, that are working on social justice, and they should be holding that space and that organization accountable for making sure that that social justice happens, not just in the wake of terrible acts that are happening around our country, but all the time, right? And Keith, I hope you don't mind me the way I'm about to say this, so hopefully Jen won't have to edit this later, but, you know, there should be white males in major positions that care about people that don't look like them, but that are part of their community. And I think what we've heard tonight is an incredible story of leadership of a maker organization, along with a number of other organizations within a community, doing what we love to see makers do best, which is having an impact and working with each other collectively to have a tremendous impact on their community, and not just their community, but I heard, even though we didn't want to talk about it, you're having impacts on communities in Texas and other places as well. So I think that that's incredible. And I think it's laudable and model, you know, something that's a model for other places. So I want to ask one quick question before we hang up, which is just to say, is it okay? I know people that watch this, we have a lot of viewers that watch after this has been aired. If someone has interest in copying or just emulating or just trying to want to be like Shreveport, how should they reach out to you? How can they get more information about the work that you're doing? How do they find the similar people in their communities? Is there an easy way? Would you guys mind sharing your information with us so that we can share it with the community as well?
Demetrius, he introduced himself as, what are you, Demetrius? The social.
Oh yeah, he's the social connector.
So he would have the answer for that.
Okay, I'm the social connector of Shreveport, gatekeeper person. So you have to see me to meet all the awesome people. Now I'm joking.
He does.
But
you're the Wizard of Oz in Shreveport.
He is that.
Right.
He really, truly is a passionate person that is going to make sure that you stay connected. And he's all about the community and the people. And I'm so proud of the work that Demetrius is doing in our community, and so glad that he's here and that he does, you know, connect us all, and it's important to him. But he's definitely that.
Yeah, I think we're all open to sharing our contacts, if that's cool.
Sure.
We're all in public facing roles. Me more than I've been comfortable with this past couple years, but my friends on the line, they've nudged me out of this whole work behind the scenes thing. So I accept being, I guess, somewhat of a public figure now. You can give people my email address, at least my Makerspace email, and I will respond quickly. And if they end up contacting me and need to get a hold of Keith or Bionica, or vice versa, if you contact one of them first, they'll route you to me. We have a nice little referral system that ping pongs back and forth. So.
Yeah, and I as a city perspective, like I just want to throw it out there that like we have so many problems as a municipality. Not, I mean the royal we as cities. You know, officials are always looking for solutions they can afford, and I think it's my opinion that the maker movement should have way more play in government in general. That's so much cheaper to use Raspberry Pis to do similar things that vendors do. And here's another thing. If we're building it in-house as a city, there's no procurement process. I get to just build it and launch it, right? Like it goes faster on so many different levels.
And we can fix it ourselves too, right? Because we built it. So
yeah,
that's another.
You know, the irony of this is that in many places that have far less resources than highly developed countries, that is what happens, right? Is because people, you know, the necessity is the mother of invention. And so, you know, people take it upon themselves to develop what they need. And I think that, you know, we've become kind of bureaucratically stymied, for lack of any other way of putting it. And we've lost, you know, at a time when we actually really need to follow through with that concept, we've lost the idea that that's possible in our communities. And it's awesome to see all of you guys, you know, kind of going at it from the bottom up rather than, you know, saying, well, it has to be stopped here and, you know, go down this person and this person and this person, by which time it's a little too late sometimes to make it really worthwhile.
I saw some maker projects where they just hung it on a pole. And I'm telling you, if that happened in my city, I'd be like, hey, did you build that? Can you build 200 more, please? You know?
Yeah, 100%. But I just want to thank you all again, like seriously admire the work that you're doing. Any way that Nation of Makers, and I'm sure I can't speak on behalf of Make Magazine, but I know that Make also.
Absolutely.
Any way we can help support the work that you're doing, scale it up, we're happy to do so. Demetrius knows that I'm one of his biggest champions and friends, and really, yeah, exactly. I mean, now I'm a fan of all of yours too. So anything you guys need, just know you're a friend of Demetrius's, you're a friend of mine. But really, with all sincerity, I really, really appreciated. We both have, Jen and I have appreciated this conversation. I know that it will be of value to so many communities around our country that are really struggling to think about how they can continue to do some of the work that they have, you know, that they so desperately need to do, especially in the face of COVID. And you've given us lots of ideas and just the ways that you work together. And it's just so beautiful to see. So just thank you again for joining us tonight. Really appreciate you, Keith, Bionica, Demetrius, and Candace, and just wish you all the best. And again, don't ever hesitate to reach out to any of us with any other questions or concerns. And for everyone watching, we look forward to having another Plan C Live next week. We don't quite yet have the topic, I don't think, Jen, but we'll be informing you guys soon. And this will always be available to you on Make Communities YouTube
channel. Yeah. So. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really wonderful to hear your stories. And I, in particular, like hearing that small cities kind of can really get the work done because they can actually communicate with each other in a way that's reasonable. In a large city, it's much more difficult. So thank you all for your time. It's great.
Thank you guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.